China recorded its first ever $1 trillion trade surplus in November, drawing criticism that its slowing economy relies on dominating global supply chains and flooding emerging markets with cheap goods diverted from the US due to President Donald Trump's tariffs. The IMF chief warned China is too large to sustain growth through exports alone, cautioning that continued dependence risks escalating global trade tensions.
As the second largest economy in the world, China is simply too big to generate much growth from exports, and continuing to depend on export-led growth risks furthering global trade tensions.
Despite tariffs imposed by Washington, which cut Chinese exports to America by nearly a third in November, China has found new markets. Shipments to Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America have surged, raising alarms in Europe. Industries from automobiles to luxury goods now face fierce competition from Chinese rivals.
Since the beginning of this year, the threat of tariffs has been brandished across the globe, with various trade restrictions proliferating and severely disrupting the world economy. As the situation unfolds, the mutually detrimental consequences of tariffs have become increasingly evident, while calls for the preservation of free trade have grown ever more insistent.
China's Statistics Bureau says it has adopted proactive policies to boost demand, upgrade industry, and spur growth. Europe, meanwhile, urges China to add value instead of flooding markets with cheap goods. Some leaders consider Trump-style tariffs, while others seek a truce.
Europeans want economic cooperation with China. We do not shy away from competition, but it must be based on rules and be fair. We hear that the Chinese side fully understands this. We know that we need to increase our competitiveness. But our Chinese counterparts also know that the European Commission closely monitors the competitive environment and must always reserve the right to take action itself.
Analysts warn of a looming second China shock. The first hit Western factories as production shifted to China. The next may hit developing nations as cheap Chinese exports overwhelm local industries in places like Indonesia, Thailand, and Malaysia. China's domestic demand remains weak, and its reliance on exports signals deepening global imbalances. This is a warning that both developed and developing economies may face another disruptive shock. The Economic Brief, DD India.
So Rahul Gupta, international trade expert, continues to be with us. Mr. Gupta, how does China's record $1 trillion trade surplus show the structural weaknesses on the demand side in their country, domestic demand down? What risks does this actually pose for global supply chains?
See, I believe the dumping, China is selling cheaper goods, and they have got multiple ways how they subsidize the business and the pricing of the product. So this dumping methodology, it is good for a start to enter into a market. Whereas once you keep supplying it at such pricing at the dumping prices, then you can't sustain. So I believe it's only for entering into new markets after US having heavy duties for the Chinese goods. To enter the new markets, they've done that, and which will be surely attracted at the initial stages. But once you keep supplying and balance out the prices, then the demand is only momentary. So I believe this dumping strategy is not a long-term proposition, how it will sustain this way. And now every country understands that if they allow their domestic industry to close down, then even when the goods become expensive from the supplying country, they have to sustain. So I don't think they'll close down, or the domestic manufacturing in those countries, they have to sustain for a while, or maybe these countries, they come up with the anti-dumping duties, etc. This is the only way they'll balance out, because this is how China in the year of 2000s, even at the start, Y2K times, had started doing with India and the other countries. They started supplying the goods cheap, and initially, and so that they expected that the factories should close down in the consuming countries. US was a different situation. US and those countries, they have very high operational cost, a very high overhead. So they can't, they would always, the Chinese goods will always be cheaper for them. Whereas for developing nations, they are able to manufacture at a competitive prices. So dumping variations, they can sustain for 6 months or a year, and then it will automatically balance out. I don't see that the China strategy, as what was there on West, on Europe and US, will be similar in case of developing countries or African countries. India would surely have an edge. India may not dump initially and then balance out the prices in the future. Indian industries will keep supplying at a stagnant pricing, and our rupee revaluation by another 5-6% in last 6 months has already made our goods competitively cheaper. But yes, we are not doing like the way other competitor in China is doing.
Indeed, but China does have a $1 trillion surplus in the month of November. But what sectors and regions are most vulnerable to a second China shock if it does take place? And how is this expected also to reshape, let's say, industrial competitiveness? You were mentioning that other countries will sort of react. India, of course, has already factored these things in with Atmanirbharta and things like that. But the point is, worldwide, how will industry react to sort of get into competition? We heard the EU gentleman saying that they have the right to watch competition, and they will decide to stop Chinese goods from coming in if they are not competitive.
So that's what I was trying to say. EU was sounding about the anti-dumping only, as a matter of fact. They felt that if they'll keep dumping, they have to balance out the pricing by specific. And I believe initially it will be electronics, which will be an important sector world over, which has to take corrective actions, because electronics, China has been always, in last 25 years, they've been reducing because of economies of scale, by adding more and more markets, by dumping goods. And I believe that will be the first threat across the globe, which has to balance out. But as being on Indian diaspora, when all the schemes of government which have been started in the last 5-7 years, I believe government is now focusing on implementing those schemes. Even lately, what government has added, the export incentives like subvention and like easy loans by virtue of CGT, SME and all those schemes. I think in just implementation would improve these things. Implementation will counterbalance the dumping coming from China. The implementation will have duo market for us, because our domestic market is robust and growing. Being in a pyramid-based society, we still have not reached a stage where our large strata of the lower pyramid, third tier level, has started consuming the goods which have still having huge potential. So I believe the moment it is the time where our third tier level of pyramid is also moving up the ladder. Huge consumption is going to come up, which in China is already it's over the phase.
They have saturated that level.
Saturated the level.
Yes, we
are
entering
into that phase. And I believe our economies of scale is on the cards now, with the government promoting export side and our domestic market of the third tier level coming in. The numbers for consumption will be so huge for the times to come, another 5 to 10 years, that economies of scale will be able to bail us out on the part of dumping, as well as for sustaining the manufacturing. And government has gone left, right, center to support people, whether it is land, for raw material pricing, for finance, and for technology. Everywhere government is trying that all 4-5 facets are being taken care for manufacturing.
We'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Mr. Rahul Gupta. Thank you for putting that into context for us, and also highlighting how India stands to gain from all this.